I guess it's no worse than my reaction to Kent Hovind reacting to me reacting to creationist arguments. But if I end up reacting to his reaction to my reaction to this guy's reaction to this video comparing human eye development to the evolution of mollusk guys, then we'll really have something.
This is an ant that was unfortunately caught up in tree sap that then turned into amber. We are led to believe that this is 34 million years old. Yet, look at the design of the ant, and then look at the modern equivalent of today. There's basically no change whatsoever. You see that there's a segmented body, legs, and mandibles. Did this really evolve? I say no, it was created, and it was an ant, it is an ant, and it'll always be an ant because of that.
Fair enough. Well, hi there. My name is Clint LOVES. I'm an evolutionary biologist. I study evolutionary ecology, particularly life history evolution, as well as evolution acceptance through teaching. I've recently been accused of being a clandestine creationist, as well as the subject of a second Kent Hovind Whack an Atheist video, which makes me feel that I'm representing both sides of this argument rather fairly, if I'm being accused of belonging to both extremes of the argument. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. But right now, I want to talk about that ant. This video features an ant preserved in amber that is supposedly 34 million years old. And yet the presenter notices that the ant's basic body form is essentially the same as modern ants, in that it has a segmented body, legs, and mandibles. He takes this as evidence that ants didn't evolve. It was an ant, it is an ant, and it will always be an ant because of that. And he's right. The animal that he has in amber was an ant while it was alive, 34 million years ago. It is still an ant, though a dead ant today, and it will always be an ant so long as it's intact. But I think what he was saying is that ants were ants 34 million years ago. Ants today are still ants, and the future descendants of ants will always be ants as well. And this is true also. Our earliest evidence for ants is at least 140 million years old. So ants definitely existed 34 million years ago. Ants can most easily be distinguished from other wasps by their geniculate antennae, which means that their antennae have an elbow in them. And the fact that the narrow portion connecting the thorax to the abdomen, which is called the petiole, has a node-like structure, like little balls. And both of these features appear to be present in the ant trapped in amber as well as the modern ant. So it is an ant. There are ants alive today, and the future descendants of ants will always be ants. As we discussed in our last video, organisms cannot evolve out of a clade, which is why the descendants of ants, no matter how unrecognizable as ants they may become, will always be ants. It's also why ants are wasps and sawflies, as well as holometabolous insects, hexapods, mandibulates, arthropods, ecdysozoans, bilaterians, and so on. Which is the funny thing about the specific features that he points out to demonstrate that the ant isn't the result of evolution. He cites a segmented body, legs, and mandibles. Well, a segmented body and legs are features of not only ants, but the entire arthropod clade. Yes, ants 34 million years ago, and ants today have them, but so do spiders, hermit crabs, millipedes, all other insects, more than 80% of all described animal species. They all have segmented bodies and legs. And the vast majority of those are in the clade mandibulata. So having a segmented body, legs, and mandibles, that doesn't make it an ant. The majority of all described species on Earth have those three attributes. So while these features do pretty clearly demonstrate that this is a mandibulate insect, they do not demonstrate in any way that ants are not a group that evolved within the mandibulate insects, which is a group that appears in the fossil record far before the first evidence of ants. So saying that ants possess the features of mandibulate insects not only does not suggest that they didn't evolve, it suggests the group they likely evolved within. On top of that, ants are doing great. It is estimated that for every human, there are about 2.5 million ants. 20 quadrillion in total. That's 20 followed by 15 zeros. The basic niche that ants fill today was present 34 million years ago and 140 million years ago as well. This basic body plan works great, so it's unsurprising that it isn't changing dramatically. Natural selection favors what works better. While ants are evolving and the species around today are not necessarily the same as the species of the distant past, it's hard to imagine a change to this planet that would make the basic ant body plan become obsolete. Evolutionary science is sometimes misrepresented or inaccurately reported, leading to public confusion and misinformation. That's why I've started using Ground News. Ground News is a website and app created by a former NASA engineer to help us navigate today's complex media landscape. It gathers related articles from all over the world so you can compare how different outlets cover the same story. Plus, every story comes with a visual breakdown of political bias, reliability, and ownership, all backed by ratings from independent organizations. Take a look at this recent story I found about sharks hunting, well, each other. It was covered by over 40 news sources. With Ground News, I can see the bias leanings, factuality, and ownership of the sources. Some headlines focus on the science, while others sensationalize the event, calling the shark evil. This is why it's important not to rely on just one source. Ground News lets you see all perspectives and get the full picture. One of my favorite features of Ground News is the blind spot feed, which highlights stories that have little or no reporting from one side of the political spectrum. It's a great way to break out of the bubble and see more balanced coverage. I really feel like this is the kind of tool that has been lacking for far too long and has allowed us to get into our little echo chambers. And I'm grateful to see that something like this finally exists so that we don't have to be blindsided by all the information we're not receiving. If, like me, you want to be able to see the full picture, go to ground.news/Clint and give it a try. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all features. So that's ground.news/Clint, and we'll have that down in the description. I think Ground News is doing important work, and I hope you'll check them out.
What is a polystrate fossil, and why are they important?
A polystrate fossil is a fossil which goes across many strata. Poly is many, straight is for stratum. So it can be a tree trunk. They're very commonly polystrate fossil. So they go across numbers of layers of rock strata. And what it indicates is that all these strata, there could not have been a long time involved in depositing them. Otherwise, the tree would have rotted away at the top. And so it's another evidence, in fact, that the fossils and the strata were buried rapidly and not over millions of years.
Okay, so this video is referring to something called a polystrate fossil, better known in the scientific community as an upright fossil, for reasons that we'll discuss in a moment. But a true polystrate fossil, as he's describing here, would be a single fossil, like a tree trunk, that crosses multiple distinct strata, which would suggest that those strata could not have been deposited over a long period of time, as he explains. And he suggests that such fossils are evidence that the fossils and the strata were all created rapidly and not over millions of years. And I agree, a single tree trunk passing through multiple strata of dramatically different ages would definitely cause us to question the actual ages of the strata. So what's the deal with these upright fossils? Well, he is correct in asserting that upright fossils were likely buried quickly. Trees are sometimes buried upright, like when Mount St. Helens erupted. And interestingly, upright fossils are frequently found near volcanoes. In all cases, upright fossils appear to have been buried rapidly, which is generally a key feature of becoming a fossil in the first place. Events like floods, landslides, and volcanic eruptions can result in rapid burial under sediments that are quite thick, but that were deposited not over millions of years, but almost all at once. And creationists are often happy to demonstrate why settling sediments can result in banding patterns of sediments deposited almost simultaneously, like we'll be able to watch here. We can watch it happen. So we agree catastrophic burial can result in thick banded layers of sedimentary rock like what we see with many upright fossils. But if multiple layers can be created near simultaneously, then why do we sometimes think that the strata are millions of years apart because we have other methods of dating. That lower layers, like this one being formed right now, are older than layers closer to the surface is called relative dating. You can simulate this right now. But the question is, how much older? 10 minutes? 10 million years? That's harder to say. Fortunately, like I said, we have other ways to date rocks. Radiometric dating is a powerful tool, using the observable decay rates of radioactive isotopes into decay products to determine when various objects were formed. For example, zircon crystals, which are almost everywhere, incorporate uranium atoms into their crystalline structure, but strongly reject lead. This is important because the radioactive uranium isotope uranium-235 decays to lead-207 and uranium-238 to lead-206. Zircon crystals, when they form, will incorporate both uranium isotopes, but no lead. Zircon crystals form when rocks cool from extreme temperatures, and the movement of uranium in and lead out ceases when those crystals cool below a point called the closure temperature. One potential problem with radiometric dating is that if a sample is reheated at any point above this closure temperature, it is possible to lose some or all of the decay products, potentially resetting the clock to zero, as if the crystal just formed. Zircon, however, has a very high closure temperature, more than 1,000 degrees Celsius, meaning that it is very unlikely that it will be reset in this manner. And if it ever does happen, if it ever does get reheated to temperatures far in excess of 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, it will make the sample appear younger, not older than it actually is. In addition to having a very high closure temperature, zircon is also very resistant to weathering and is not very chemically reactive. In other words, it is very unlikely that any outside forces will destroy them or alter the ratios of uranium isotopes or lead decay products. The only way that we can get more lead-207 or 206 is through radioactive decay from uranium-235 and 238. And one more nice thing is that uranium-235 decays at a different rate than uranium-238. It will take 700 million years for half of a sample of U-235 to decay into lead-207 based on the decay rates that we can observe today. And 4.5 billion years for half a sample of U-238 to decay into lead-206, which is nice because each sample includes two different clocks. Zircon crystals form when magma cools and also when heat and pressure are applied to form metamorphic rocks, which means that it is present in igneous and metamorphic rocks all over the world, which is handy for determining when these rocks formed. The bad news is that sedimentary rock is not metamorphic nor igneous. It is made up of particles of other rocks from all sorts of other times and places that become sediments through erosion and piled up before solidifying as fragile sedimentary rock. There are some new techniques that use the zircon crystals in sedimentary rock to determine its age, but historically we couldn't do that because those crystals formed long before the sedimentary rock formed. And most fossils are embedded in sedimentary rock. No worries though, sedimentary rock is often found between layers of igneous rock, or with intrusions of igneous rock cutting through the layers. When sedimentary rocks are between layers of igneous rocks, we can use lead-uranium dating to give us an upper and lower range for the age of the sedimentary rock because it must be between the ages of the layers of igneous rocks. We also know that sedimentary rock layers must be older than the intrusions that pass through them because intrusions can't cut through rock that didn't exist. What I'm saying is that all over the world we find sedimentary rocks that can be dated using igneous rocks above, below, and through them. And what we find is there are certain common fossils that we only find in sediments that can be dated to a specific and narrow range of times. And just to be clear, because we've discussed this misconception before, these fossils are dated by radiometric dating. In the past, this may not have been possible, but it is today. So if you doubt the dates of the past, they can be rechecked in the present. But these fossils that we know from radiometric dating are only ever found at specific periods of time and are very common are called index fossils. This perisphinctes ammonite is a very common index fossil. We only find them in sediments that date to the mid to late Jurassic. Anywhere I find these in an igneous sandwich, I can guess with a high degree of certainty that the lower level will be older than that, and the higher layer, or any intrusions, will be younger than that. And I can double check that with radiometric dating. And if I find sediments that aren't in an igneous sandwich, but I find these fossils, what does that tell me that I wouldn't otherwise be able to know? Now that gets me back to upright fossils. If I find an upright fossil of something like a tree, I have many ways to test if it was buried rapidly or over millions of years. If it was buried in volcanic ash, I can use radiometric dating on all of the layers. Do they date from the same period, or do they appear to come from dramatically different periods? If they're buried in sedimentary rock, are there any igneous layers present that I could use to date them with radiometric dating? Do I find index fossils supposedly from different time periods in the layers around the fossil, or are they all from the same time period? Many creationist sources claim that scientists say that these upright fossils are buried in layers that appear to be millions of years apart. But I've never seen an example of an upright fossil that, through the use of radiometric dating or index fossils, appears to be buried over a long period of time. The reality is that we agree that they were buried rapidly, and all of our current dating methods support that conclusion. So yes, upright fossils are great evidence that catastrophic burial events do occur, but they're not evidence that our ability to date fossils and rock layers is flawed in any way.
Many people say crocodiles are dinosaurs, but that's not what you think. Why is that?
Because crocodiles have a very different anatomy. If you think about the way a crocodile walks, the arms grow out from the side, sprawl out, and it waddles around. A dinosaur is different because it has an open hip socket, and that is unique to dinosaurs. And what that allows it to do is allow the limbs of a dinosaur to go straight down, so it walks upright. A dinosaur is a land reptile that walks in an upright position. So a crocodile doesn't have this hip socket, therefore it's not a dinosaur. But there's something interesting here. Evolutionists today would say that birds are dinosaurs, but birds do not have the dinosaur hip socket.
Okay, so this presenter is being asked if crocodiles are dinosaurs. He responds by saying that they are not dinosaurs. He mentions that crocodiles have a very different pelvic anatomy and walk with a sprawled stance instead of the upright stance characteristic of dinosaurs. A perforate acetabulum, which he refers to as an open hip socket, which is really not a bad way of describing it. He says that a crocodile does not have this hip socket, therefore it is not a dinosaur. And then he goes on to say that evolutionists today say that birds are dinosaurs, but, quote, birds do not have the dinosaur hip socket. Okay, so let me just start by saying that he is right that crocodilians are not dinosaurs. No informed person thinks that they are. That said, when I tell people that there is a single lineage of dinosaurs alive today, they generally go, oh, crocodiles, right? And they're wrong. Crocodilians are archosaurs, like dinosaurs. They are the closest living relatives to dinosaurs, but dinosaurs they are not. And the lack of a perforate acetabulum is one of many ways to demonstrate that they're not dinosaurs. We went into a great deal of detail about this hip structure in this video, which totally rocks, and you should watch it if you're into that kind of thing. But in a nutshell, where the ilium, ischium, and pubis bones come together in dinosaurs, a hole is left at the back of the hip socket, allowing the two femoral heads to look at one another in a dinosaur skeleton. There is a hole at the back of their hip socket leading right into the other hip socket. Almost all dinosaurs have this, but crocodilians do not. But it is possible for some members of a group to lose a feature generally thought to be diagnostic of the group. For example, feathered wings are diagnostic of birds, but moas did not have any wings at all, but they were still birds. Similarly, this hole in the acetabulum of ankylosaurs became filled in. They don't have a perforate acetabulum, but they're still dinosaurs. So it is possible to lose this one feature, but still be part of the dinosaur lineage. That said, crocodilians are still not dinosaurs. But birds do have an upright posture and a perforate acetabulum. So I don't know what he's talking about here. But we have a second video from the same interview that might shed a little more light.
If a bird has teeth and claws in the fossil record, does that mean it's a dinosaur?
No. Some of these extinct birds do have teeth, claws, and a long tail, but these features are very bird-like. They are not the same as the dinosaurs. So for example, Confuciusornis has extinct bird, it has claws on its fingers, but it has a wing that's very similar to a modern chicken wing. So that's just a bird. Now you have some teeth on some of these birds, but they're very light and they're very different from the deeply rooted dinosaur teeth that we find in many of the theropod dinosaurs. The same thing can be said about the tail. The tail in some of these extinct birds is thin and long and it's really very much the anatomy of a bird rather than that of a dinosaur.
In this video, the same speaker is asked if a bird has teeth and claws in the fossil record, does that mean that it's a dinosaur? To which he answers no. But he does admit that some extinct birds had teeth, claws, and a long tail. But he says that these features are very bird-like, that they're not the same as the dinosaurs. He references the extinct animal called Confuciusornis, which he calls an extinct bird, and mentions that it had claws on its fingers, but a wing very similar in form and likely function to that of a chicken. And therefore, Confuciusornis is just a bird. And then he mentions that some ancient birds also had teeth, but they were very light and not as deeply rooted as those of many of the theropod dinosaurs. Some of these birds had long, thin tails, but he says that it is really very much the anatomy of a bird rather than that of a dinosaur. So there's a lot to unpack here. Let's begin by taking a look at Confuciusornis. This is an avialan from China between 125 and 120 million years ago. And you probably now have a pretty good handle on how we got those dates. So this is the early Cretaceous. The oldest evidence of birds dates back to the Jurassic. Birds didn't evolve after the extinction of the other dinosaurs as many people mistakenly believe. They coexisted with other dinosaurs. Confuciusornis was an avialan, which is the clade to which modern birds belong, so an argument can certainly be made that it was a bird. It had a cornified beak instead of teeth, and a short fused tail like that of modern birds. But as the speaker mentioned, it had long clawed fingers, one of a number of traits that were more like those of other theropod dinosaurs than they were like modern birds. But it is therefore more bird-like than the majority of flying feathered creatures that we find from around that time, which all had, as the speaker noted, teeth instead of beaks and long thin tails. He says the teeth were lighter and not as deeply rooted as those of many other theropod dinosaurs, and that's almost certainly true. Tyrannosaurids are other theropod dinosaurs, and you could say that about any other dinosaur as long as they're your reference point. The fact that flight and lighter skulls are associated with one another should also come as no surprise. I'm not sure how you just hand wave away teeth on birds, but it's not quite as shocking as his statement that the long thin tails of many of these birds are the anatomy of a bird rather than that of a dinosaur. Birds have short fused tails called a pygostyle, like that of Confuciusornis. Now, where would I go to find a long, thin tail on an animal with a perforate acetabulum, upright posture, hollow pneumatic bones, feathers, teeth, and hand claws? I can only think of one place. Creationists are often asking for examples of transitional fossils. I don't know what to tell you. That's what they look like. But anyway, before this next video, I want to talk to you about being whacked twice by Kent Hovind, and about my recent interest in geology. So Kent Hovind, who actually played a non-trivial role in turning me into an atheist in my youth, has twice featured me in his Whack an Atheist videos, once for each of these videos that we've made, despite the fact that I am no longer an atheist. I do believe in God. After being whacked once, without him actually addressing my points, I invited him to respond to this steel man of the creationist position that I explained in the first video. I have so far received no negative criticism from creationists about its content, and apparently made the case well enough that many have since labeled me as some sort of clandestine creationist double agent. But instead of reacting to that, Mr. Hovind decided to give me a second atheist whack. Unfortunately, he spent most of the video watching the Tucker Carlson interview on Joe Rogan, and then arguing with words Tucker used as I restated his points, and then right as I started getting into my rebuttal, he decided that he didn't have time to go on. So Kent, if you want to react to me again, I beg of you, react to my steel man of the creationist position. I would honestly appreciate your feedback. I'm not trying to misrepresent anyone. But if you decide to react to my arguments, It might be of value to listen to my arguments that I'm actually making in their entirety. And if you can, summarize them as accurately as possible. And then, if there are flaws, address them. I would love to see such a response from you. As for geology, I'll be honest, Kent got me kind of excited about geology. I have no formal education in geology, but Kent made some statements about geology that I knew were inaccurate, but my limited knowledge of the subject left me feeling unqualified to correct. It isn't too valuable to say someone is wrong, but then be entirely unable to tell them what is right. So I've been learning as much as I can about geology ever since. But it's hard to find good information beyond the most basic concepts. I would love to take a university level course in geology, but I don't want a degree. I don't want to deal with prerequisites. I don't want to enroll at a university. I don't even care about getting credit. I just want to learn from an expert, and I don't want to pay a fortune for it. And that is why starting this October, we're going to start offering university level courses in the subjects that I am qualified to teach here at Clint's Reptile Room. So you can have what I, so far, do not. Our first course will be in herpetology. There are 24 spots available, so if you're anywhere near Springville, Utah, and you want to massively increase your knowledge of reptiles, sign up at clintsreptiles.com.
This whole evolutionary concept that life came from non-life, it actually violates a law of science. It is one of the only laws in biology. It's called the law of biogenesis. It says that life comes from life, not non-life.
The law of biogenesis that says all life comes from pre-existing life, and yet evolution says that life can come from non-life. Surprise, if you just wait long enough.
But you know what? We see no examples of that today. We can't observe it. We can't repeat it. People just believe it.
Okay, so here we have a couple of speakers talking about life coming from non-life. They say that life coming from life and not non-life is a law in biology called the law of biogenesis, and that life coming from non-life would violate this law, and that evolution says that life can come from non-life if you wait long enough. Earlier, life coming from non-life was referred to as an evolutionary concept. Yet we see no examples of this today. We can't observe it, we can't repeat it, but people apparently just believe it. And before I respond to this video, I want to watch one more and then we'll discuss them both together.
Is the origin of life part of the theory of evolution?
Well, it certainly is, especially as part of materialism, because you have to explain how living things got there before you can even start talking about Darwinian evolution. And evolutionary textbooks usually discuss origin of first life. A Scientific American issue on evolution started off with chemical evolution and the origin of life. The general theory of evolution is defined as the theory that all living creatures evolved from a single-celled creature which itself came from an inorganic form. Now, the thing is, you have to get to reproduction before you can talk about natural selection. So Darwinian evolution is dead on the starting line if there's no way of getting to the stage of first self-reproducing cells.
In this video, we have an interviewer asking, is the origin of life part of the theory of evolution? To which the speaker responds that it certainly is, especially as part of materialism, because you have to explain how living things got there before you can even start talking about Darwinian evolution. He also mentions that the origin of life is generally discussed in textbooks about evolution. Scientific American's issue on evolution started with chemical evolution and the origin of life. And he says that evolutionary theory says that all life descended from a single-celled creature that itself came from an inorganic form. He says that you have to get to reproduction before you can talk about natural selection. So Darwinian evolution is dead on the starting line if there's no way of getting to the stage of first reproducing cells. So hopefully you can see why I put these two clips together. Let's start with the first clip and the law of biogenesis. In our last video, we went over the definitions of a fact, a hypothesis, a theory, and a law because they're frequently misunderstood. We explained that laws are descriptions, usually mathematical, of phenomena that occur as far as we have observed in exactly the same way every time under a specific set of circumstances. Now, I know of no scientifically recognized law of biogenesis. I've only heard of this from creationists. But it isn't wholly unreasonable. Life does, as far as we have observed, come from other life under the circumstances that there is pre-existing life from which to come. I have no problem with that. However, I think there are a couple of problems with what is being said here. One, we have good evidence that there was a time on Earth when there was no life, and there was a time when there was no Earth. no sun, no stars, no universe. So at some point, there was probably no life. So somehow, life originated in our universe in some way other than the way that we have observed. That's probably why this isn't a generally recognized law. We know with a high degree of certainty that at some point, this law was violated. Even if a deity forming organisms from clay and breathing life into them was the way that it was violated. Second, I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding of how unbreakable scientific laws are. Laws are not limitations from on high that cannot be broken. They are patterns that we've observed that seem to never be broken, until the day comes that we make some observations that show that the pattern does not always hold. At which point we either need to modify the conditions under which they do or cast it aside as a law. So just because our observations over the last few millennia seem to show all life coming from other existing life, that does not mean that this is always the case under all sets of possible conditions. The question is then, how did life originate? And we discussed the difficulty with answering this question the last time as well. And that really gets us to where the two videos collide. Does biological evolution hinge on our correct understanding of how life began? They all say yes. And the speaker from the second video specifies, especially as part of materialism, which is a good clarifier. It is within the realm of possibilities that the first life form was created through some supernatural means and that evolution began thereafter. But ontological naturalism would require some other explanation. That said, science does not deny the possibility of the existence of the supernatural. But to be an ontological naturalist, you would have to believe that there is a natural explanation for all phenomena. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that you would need to know what all of the explanations are. He seems to think that you should, which seems like an unreasonable expectation. He says that you have to explain how living things got there before you can even start talking about Darwinian evolution. Why? That's a bit like saying that if you don't know how numbers originated, then you can't talk about how 2 + 2 is 4. You can't talk about how to bake a cake if you can't explain how the ingredients got to your table, starting not with the Big Bang, but with how the singularity formed in the first place. How many times has the universe expanded and collapsed? And is this the only universe, or is there a multiverse? Why? Yes, there are other forms of change that have happened in the universe, stellar evolution, chemical evolution, etc. Do they happen? Probably. Would the world be the same if they didn't happen? Probably not. If our understanding of these things turns out to be wrong, will that change our understanding of biological evolution? Nope. What we understand of evolution on Earth does not depend on our understanding of how stars evolve or how life first began on this planet. Other than that, the oldest evidence that we have for life on this planet suggests that early life was single-celled and simple compared to much of life on Earth today. How did we get here? Good question. One that is interesting to the same kind of people that seek high-level understanding of evolution, but not the foundation of our understanding of how life has changed and diversified since it began, however it began. Biological evolution is dead on the starting line if there's no way of getting to the stage of first reproducing cells. But it also doesn't require that those first reproducing cells came to be in any specific way. So this is now the third video in this series that we've made, and I will tell you that the 2 Patreon extras videos that we've made for the first 2 have probably been the most popular and well-received Patreon extras videos we've ever made. And I can tell you that the Patreon extras video for this third installment is no exception. If you don't know what I'm talking about, or if you want to see that, hop on over to our Patreon, check it out. It helps us to create more content like this in the future. And we've got a lot of cool features for you as well.
Scientists not only see evidence of evolution in the increasing complexity of mollusk eye development, they see it even in our own development. The eyes of a human fetus grow increasingly complex.
You get basically a light-sensitive patch, and then you get a cup-like form that eventually forms a whole lens and a full eye with all the nerves and all the connections, and then the baby is born, and then you can see.
Comparing the development of an eye in a fetus to the range of complexities of eyes in the mollusks is ridiculous, because when the egg is fertilized, that child that's going to have that eye as it develops, the eye is coded for. It has to go through developmental stages because you start off with 2 cells and 4 cells and 8 cells. I mean, you've got to develop. It's ridiculous to compare embryologic development to supposed evolutionary progression in mollusks. And then my favorite part is, and then the baby's born and it can see. It's unimaginably complex.
All right, welcome to Inception. We're gonna react to someone reacting to another video.
We're dreaming. You're actually in the middle of the workshop right now, sleeping. This is your first lesson.
So this speaker is reacting to a video that describes how the development of the human eye before birth closely mirrors the different forms of eyes found in mollusks. You get a light-sensitive patch, which forms a cup, and then a lens, and then by the time the baby is born, you get a fully formed camera-style eye. The speaker reacting to this video says that the comparison of the human eye during development to the range of complexities in the eye of mollusks is ridiculous, because the eye is coded for in the developing human from the moment of conception. It has to develop and go through stages as it does, but it's ridiculous to compare development to supposed evolutionary progression in mollusks. And he ends by saying that vision in the baby is unimaginably complex. Okay. Now for Vinception, as I respond to this response. I guess it's no worse than my reaction to Kent Hovind reacting to me reacting to creationist arguments. But if I end up reacting to his reaction to my reaction to this guy's reaction to this video comparing human eye development to the evolution of mollusk guys, then we'll really have something. Anyway, it is true that human eye development before birth does follow a similar path to that which we hypothesize may have occurred in the ancestors of modern vertebrates, culminating in a camera-style eye. And the vertebrate eye is a pretty good camera-style eye. There are a couple of ways, though, that it could easily be improved. One would be to use a movable lens instead of changing the shape of the lens. Then you'd be much less likely to need bifocals when you get older. And second, don't have the optic nerve pass through the retina, creating a blind spot. These are slight imperfections. Evolution doesn't make perfect structures, just structures that work with the variation that exists. That said, the camera-style eyes of cephalopods, which are mollusks, have movable lenses and a retina in front of the optic nerve, so a slightly better camera-style eye. And all of the stages observed in human eye development and hypothesized to have occurred for the camera-style eye to have evolved in vertebrates exist today in living mollusks. This doesn't prove that this is what happened in vertebrates, but it does demonstrate that the camera-style eye, for all of its unimaginable complexity, is not irreducibly complex. All of the stages along the pathway to the camera-style eye function and confer benefit. And the fact that we see these stages as we develop certainly lends credibility to the hypothesis that this is what happened in our lineage. We went into great detail demonstrating how each of these stages function in mollusks in this video, which I recommend that you watch right now. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon.
Let's assume we got that ant from the amber.
Mm-hmm.
And we said, poof, and we brought it back to life.
Yeah.
First off, the first thing it would say is, I'm 34 million years old.
Of course. 34 million years in the amber gives you such a crick in the neck.
This goes back to the biological species concept. If evolution was minimal, is it...
That ant can't breed.
Can it breed?
No.
How do you know?
It's not a queen or a king.
Oh, okay. That's true.
But it also doesn't speak the same language anymore. It's been 34 million years.
Relative dating. I think Will's more familiar with dating relatives. I don't know.
Stop it. Thanks, Jason.
I think there's a story here.
I told you I like brunettes.
Now you know why. Get burned a couple times.
You're talking about my parents.
Yeah. I've never dated one, but it is pretty common in my family. I spoke once to my only set of grandparents, and I said, why is there so much relative dating? Of all the cousins I could have married, you was my sister. That said, science does not deny the possibility of the existence of the supernatural.
The atheists are gonna string you up for that one.
Are they?
Yes.
Why?
Because you are
acknowledging the possibility of the supernatural?
Not just you are leaving a gaping hole for that possibility. You even called it out specifically, right? The vocal minority on both sides want, right?
Yep.
It's all or nothing.
Yep.
This way or not.
Yep.
I think they're going to come at you for that one.
Let them come.